The microphone hit the floor, echoing sharply through the room filled with white roses. All eyes turned to me, the bride whom her groom had just called a dead weight. Awkward laughter rose and then died. I sat there, the wedding dress clinging to my trembling body, as if that layer of lace was the only thing keeping me upright. The man I once loved was reveling in my humiliation on our wedding day. But what Garrett did not know was that every word he spoke tonight was only playing the part in a play I had been directing in secret. I met Garrett in an interview in the fall, when the trees outside the office were turning yellow. He arrived 10 minutes late, his shirt wrinkled, his tie askew, but his eyes shone as if he was sure he would get the job. "I'm not the best person," he said, "but I will be the person you never regret choosing." At that time, my company was still small, only 8 people working on a mezzanine in downtown Eugene. Garrett walked in like a fresh breeze, quick, confident, and able to make clients smile after a few words. I was rational by nature, always separating work from emotion, but his warmth slowly broke the rules I had long believed in. He would often stop by my desk after work, bringing 2 cups of coffee, asking about small things that few people cared about. "Aren't you tired?" Garrett asked one evening, when I was still typing a report. "I'm used to it," I replied without looking up. "People only get used to loneliness when they no longer remember how to be loved," he said softly, then left before I could respond. His words cut through the cold armor I had worn for years. I don't know when it started, but every message he sent, every time he smiled, made my heart tremble slightly. Our feelings for each other were not loud. They began with short lunches, nights planning projects together, and then one day he touched my hand so lightly I thought it was a breeze. I did not pull my hand away. Garrett made me feel like a girl falling in love for the first time. He always knew what tired women wanted to hear. He praised me for being smart, strong, then said that made him feel small. I thought those were honest words, not knowing that behind that gentle gaze was a man learning to perfect his performance. As the company grew, I promoted him to creative director. I believed in his talent, trusting that if I had to struggle to build everything with my own hands, Garrett would be the one beside me, helping me keep the humanity I had lost. I did not expect him to be the one to take away what was left. In the early years, we attended conferences together, dined with partners, planned the future. I remember his look during meetings full of admiration and pride. But when the company started getting press, when Garrett began appearing in business magazines, that look gradually disappeared. He began arriving late, lying about client meetings, and avoiding sincere conversations. I discovered he had rented a separate apartment in the south of the city, saying it was to work quietly. I lied to myself that perhaps he needed space. Any woman who loves too much has told herself similar lies. Gradually, Garrett became arrogant. At events he stopped introducing me as the founder, calling me instead Marisol, a partner. Once, when I reached to adjust his tie in front of clients, he lightly brushed my hand away and smiled. "Don't do that. You make me look like a little boy." The words were light, but they made my heart slip out of my chest. I realized my love was being traded for subtle humiliation. Elias, Garrett's younger brother, was the first to notice. He was a freelance photographer who often came to the office to shoot promotional projects. Elias was quiet, with deep, calm eyes. One evening, when I sat in my car in the parking lot after work, trying not to cry, he tapped on the window. "I don't mean to meddle in your business," Elias said, "but if you stay silent, he'll think you don't feel pain." I looked at him, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. "I'm used to others misunderstanding me," I replied. Elias shook his head. "No, you're punishing yourself." From that day, whenever I stayed late, Elias would stop by and leave a hot cup of tea on my desk. That gesture made me feel both moved and afraid because I began to feel safer with him than with my soon-to-be husband. The turning point came when Garrett hosted the product launch for the subsidiary the brand I had funded for him to run. On stage, in front of the press, he smiled and thanked the partners who believed, but did not mention me. I stood behind the wings, gripping my glass tightly, my heart icy. Elias stood beside me, reading every slight expression on my face. When the party ended, he whispered, "Have you ever thought of stopping?" Stopping. After I built my whole life around one person. Not stopping loving him, but stopping letting him hurt you. Those words lingered, like a faint beam of light in a dark room. I knew what I had to do, but I didn't yet have the courage. Until I discovered the company account had been drained of more than $300,000, money Garrett used for private investments. I understood. This love had turned into a business transaction, and I was the last to realize I had been bought with my own emotions. That night, when Garrett came home late, a strange perfume clinging to his shirt, I asked softly, "Are you happy, Garrett?" He smiled, kissed my cheek, and replied vaguely, "If you stopped doubting everything, we'd be happier." I looked at him and realized I was living with a stranger, someone who loved only his reflected image. I began recording every transaction, every contract, every email he sent. Not to expose him yet, but because I knew I would eventually need evidence to protect myself. Elias saw me change, saw my eyes brighten in a different way, not with trust, but with clarity. He only said quietly, "You're building a plan, aren't you?" "No, I'm just rewriting the script of my life." From then on I put distance between us. Garrett thought I had cooled. He became sweet again, sometimes bringing flowers, sending morning messages, as if trying to make me forget the fractures. But inside me, things had been silent too long to be revived. Each night, while he slept, I sat alone in my study, staring at a copy of the share agreement he had signed. He did not know that with one small edit in the ownership clause, all assets listed under his name would revert to me. I once thought love made people strong. No, it teaches endurance, to bear, and then quietly plan. And my cruelest revenge would be to let others reveal their own true nature. I returned to my apartment after the final dress fitting, feeling both hollow and lucid. The city outside rushed on, streetlights reflecting on the glass of sleepless roads. I sat amid invitations and contracts, my hands shaking while my mind was cold as ice. The plan was not a momentary impulse, it was the result of many nights of calculation, of wounds I had buried like shards of glass. I knew that if I let emotion decide, everything would shatter. So I would not allow myself to cry. I allowed myself to make a list. I hired a small film crew, 2 camera operators, 1 editor, a 4th person for sound, all professional but discreet, not ostentatious. The reason I gave them was to make a wedding memory film, but the shots I wanted were not the smiles on the dance floor or the cake. I needed the hidden corners, the last glances, the conversations loosened by alcohol. I requested that everything be saved to 2 separate hard drives, one for archive and one for backup, and I kept an encrypted copy, copied daily to a secure server. The work was expensive, but the value of evidence is always more costly than any lullaby of excuses. Elias knew a few of those filmmakers. He had an affinity for art and quiet connections. When I told him the plan, his eyes did not ask why, but "Are you sure?" I answered briefly, "You know, I don't do anything rash." Elias did not smile, he nodded and placed his hand on the table as if to give support. His silence over many months became essential. It was the anchor that kept me from the drunken urges for immediate revenge and forced me to think long-term. I revised the contract with a lawyer, a middle-aged, strict woman who had helped me draft the company from the beginning. She looked at me through her glasses and said slowly, "Marisol, the law is a double-edged sword. If you want to protect yourself, everything must be clear and transparent. No legal gap for an opponent to exploit." I agreed, and we prepared a set of documents, transfers, authorizations, but in a completely legal manner. Garrett signed the stamps, the approvals, all clearly stated in the files he rarely read carefully. He always trusted me. That was his weakness. In the days before the wedding, I spent my time finalizing the investment license, a phrase Wilson, the lawyer, used whenever we wanted to make the transfer look like an administrative procedure. Garrett sat across from me, holding a glass of wine, skimmed a few lines, and signed. He smiled when I said thank you and kissed my forehead as if nothing serious stood between us. To him, it was just a signature on paper, nothing more. To me, it was a command line changing ownership. Alongside the paperwork, I had to deal with Sophie, the woman Garrett trusted, the one I knew had entered his life like a quiet destroyer. I didn't want noise, didn't want to burn others just to satisfy my anger. I wanted the truth to unfold naturally, for masks to fall off on their own. So I let Sophie feel safe. Around Garrett, I let her get close, Write affectionate emails that I copied, archive messages, and capture photos from hidden corners only the observant would notice. I didn't need to expose her. I needed a timeline. Elias helped me more than he said. One evening he came over and placed a thick envelope in front of me. I took copies from the company photocopier, he said. He left the documents there unlocked. I thought you should see them. Inside were transfer receipts, investment contracts, and email exchanges with funds all matching what I suspected. I turned each page, feeling both betrayed and vindicated. Not because of revenge, but because now everything had proof, and proof forces people to face the truth. I thought of my mother, who taught me that women didn't need to fight to earn respect. They just needed the world to recognize their worth. My mother had been gone for years, but her words remained. Never lose yourself for anyone. I held on to that as a reminder and vowed not to let my life become someone else's performance. That day, I opened my computer and typed a short email to Wilson & Associates Law Firm CC, Sandra Myers, Company Chief Accountant, subject: Update on shareholder ownership and investment license. I attached the contract Garrett had signed earlier, along with the notarized transfer form. I didn't need them to reply immediately. I needed the send time and recipient logs recorded in the system, proof that everything happened openly and legally. Sandra was a careful woman who had worked with me for 7 years. Right after receiving the email, she called, "Marisol, I noticed a few unusual details in this transfer form. Are you sure you want to keep it as is?" "Keep it," I replied calmly. "Just make sure every number matches the records filed with the Business Bureau." Sandra hesitated. "And Garrett? He already signed, and he trusts me. We're just finalizing paperwork." I heard Sandra exhale on the other end, like someone who sensed something larger behind it but chose silence. After hanging up, I saved all our exchanges, took screenshots of my sent folder, and stored them in an encrypted directory. Everything had timestamps, locations, and witnesses. Every small detail was a brick in the fortress I was building. The most delicate part of the plan was how I would reveal it. I didn't plan to scream at the party or stage some dramatic scene. I wanted everything to unfold in a moment when Garrett's own words would expose him. So the film crew knew their task: to position the cameras where they could capture the entire stage, both families' tables, entrances, and whispered conversations over wine. They had to be silent as shadows, only recording the truth. That night, the lights would reveal every expression and the light itself would be the witness. I also prepared another file, not just the contract but a small financial report clearly outlining the transfer of shares and yearly profits. I hired an anonymous independent analyst to create it, calling it an internal assessment. He didn't know the real purpose, he only worked with numbers. When I placed the report beside the printed emails, I felt like someone holding the key to unlock the sealed box of truth. The night before the wedding, I sat on the small balcony, holding a cup of cold tea, looking down at the empty street. Everything looked peaceful, innocent, and I wondered whether that peace would still belong to me after everything was revealed. I thought of Elias, how he had always looked at me differently and longed for a life where I didn't have to hide. I thought of Garrett, the man I once trusted enough to give my name on papers, to let him hold the right to make me soft. I didn't hate him with blind rage. I felt a quiet grief, like mourning a beautiful memory. On the morning of the wedding, I arrived early. I walked through the banquet hall as people decorated, touching each ribbon, each glass. The scent of roses was gentle, like a promise. When the film crew took their places, I handed the lead cameraman a small envelope. "If anything happens tonight, make sure this footage reaches the lawyer and the press," I said calmly. They understood the gravity of it, not as drama, but as professional duty, to record the truth for someone who had been wronged. Elias stopped by afterward, holding my hand for a moment. That touch said more than words. "Be careful," he whispered. I smiled like someone who had already decided. "You don't need to worry. I'm prepared for every possibility." And when the lights began to glow, when the guests started arriving, I knew there was only one step left, the step where secrets would surface. Where I would have to face not only them but also myself. I didn't know whether the future would be merciful or cruel. I only knew that from now on, every action I took must have a reason, and every reason must lead to a clear ending. I stood up, adjusted the thin veil, and walked into the waiting room where the play I had written would unfold, and where the truth would begin to tell itself. The sound in the banquet hall felt strangled, leaving only the steady cold rhythm of my heartbeat. The crystal lights shone on Garrett's face, the face that had once made me believe every lie. He stood frozen, hands limp, eyes wide, staring at the screen behind him where the footage of him and Sophie replayed slow, clear, undeniable. Whispers spread like small waves, then swelled into a storm. A few women covered their mouths, some men shook their heads, and Garrett's mother, Lucinda, sat motionless, her wine glass tilting, the red spilling onto the pure white tablecloth like blood. Garrett swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "This is fake. Marisol, you staged this." I stepped forward and spoke into the microphone, my tone steady, like reading a contract. "Ladies and gentlemen, all these recordings were made by the professional film crew, the same team Garrett and I hired for this wedding. I only changed what they filmed." A small burst of laughter came from the back of the room, mingled with gasps. I looked straight at Garrett, my eyes no longer angry but filled with pity. "You called me a burden. Perhaps you forgot that you've been living on my shoulders. Whitmore and Dean, the house on Alder Street, the 3 biggest contracts you flaunt in the media all bear my signature. And every bank account is under my name." Garrett stared at me, his face shifting from red to white, as if realizing the depth of the hole he had dug. He lunged forward, snatching the microphone from my hand, his voice trembling with rage. "What do you want, Marisol? To humiliate me? To turn our wedding into a circus?" "No, Garrett. I just want you to understand what it feels like to be humiliated by the person you trusted most." Elias, standing at the back of the room, remained silent. His eyes were fixed on me, not shocked, but quietly accepting. I knew he understood that tonight I wasn't just taking revenge, I was cutting the last tie between Garrett and me. Garrett still refused to believe what he was hearing. He forced a smile, turning to the guests. "She's lost control. We should be understanding. Pre-wedding stress. You all know how it is." His voice shook, and I saw fear appear for the first time beneath his arrogance. I raised my hand, signaling the tech crew. The screen behind him lit up again. This time it wasn't an intimate video but the share transfer document with Garrett's signature enlarged line by line. Transferor, Garrett Whitmore. Recipient, Marisol Dean. The projector hummed softly, then stopped on the notarized seal. I took a deep breath and looked around the packed room at the people who once called me the lucky girl. This isn't a prank. This is reality. He called me a dead weight, but for the past 3 years, I've been the one signing every transaction, paying every salary, and guaranteeing every investment loan. And he was just the face of it. Garrett threw the microphone to the floor, the sound echoing hollowly through the silent room. He turned sharply to his mother, his voice cracking. "Mom, say something, this is her scheme." Lucinda didn't answer. She looked at me, tears blurring her eyes, then turned to her son and whispered, "Garrett, what have you done?" Garrett stumbled off the stage, grabbing her shoulders. "Mom, I was set up. She orchestrated everything." I looked at them calmly, 2 people who once believed they had the right to judge me as unworthy of their family. I didn't need to argue. The truth had spoken for itself. Some guests began leaving their tables. The air in the room was so heavy it could be cut with a knife. I could feel the heat of the lights on my skin, but inside I was cold. Every emotion had long been drained. Garrett turned back, eyes blazing. "You'll regret this, Marisol. You think you've won? No one wins when they turn love into a battlefield. You're wrong, Garrett. Love doesn't turn into a battlefield. You did that the moment you made me the target of your contempt." Sophie, his lover, had been standing quietly in a corner all evening. Now she stepped forward, trembling. She tried to speak but only managed a whisper. "Garrett." He turned to her, his face twisted with fury. "Be quiet. You're the reason this happened." I smiled faintly. "No, Garrett," I said softly. "No one made you this way. You just revealed who you really are." That sentence was the final cut, severing the thin string still connecting us. Garrett stepped forward, about to speak again, but Elias rose and moved quickly toward him. He placed a hand on his brother's shoulder, his Elias Rose Walster, voice firm. That's enough, Garrett. Garrett spun around, eyes blazing. What do you know, Elias? I know you hurt the only woman who ever truly loved you. Elias said, his gaze steady. The contrast between them, between Garrett's fury and Elias's calm, made the entire room hold its breath. I stepped back, unwilling to interfere. In that moment, I only wanted to watch the truth shatter on its own, piece by piece. Lucinda stood up, her voice trembling. Stop it. This is your wedding, not a place to disgrace each other. With all due respect, ma'am, you're the one who taught him to treat women like decorations. I'm only doing what you forgot to teach, that dignity has its own voice. Garrett looked up at me as if seeing, for the first time, that the woman standing before him was no longer his Marisol. I was a stranger, someone he had lost without realizing it. Then he stormed off the stage, rushing out as the cameras kept rolling. The remaining guests looked at one another, too stunned to speak. The light from the giant screen still flickered across the room like a distorted moon, illuminating faces filled with both horror and pity. I stood there amid the grandeur now turned to ruin, the wedding dress still pure white, but inside I had turned to stone. I heard Elias's voice behind me. Marisol, we should go. I looked around the hall, the place that had once symbolized the happiness I had foolishly believed in, then turned and slowly walked down the steps. Through fallen petals, through the mingled scent of wine and tears. I knew in that moment that nothing could ever return to what it was. But it was also the moment I finally stepped into the part of life no one else could ever control for me again. The air in the hall felt sucked empty after that slap. The skin on my cheek burned, yet strangely, I felt no pain. The true sting was in Lucinda's eyes, filled with hatred and fear. She stood before me trembling, her hand still raised as if even she couldn't believe what she had just done. You are not worthy of being a Whitmore. Her voice rasped, torn between rage and panic. The room was full, yet it felt like only the two of us stood there, facing each other like soldiers on a preordained battlefield. I smiled, my voice calm to the point of cruelty. You sure you don't want me to play the second video, Mrs. Whitmore? Lucinda froze for a brief moment, her eyes flickering. Garrett rushed over from across the room, grabbing the microphone. Marisol, you've lost your mind. Enough. Stop this. I looked at him and tilted my head slightly. You think I'll stop after everything you've said? I pressed the small remote in my hand. The screen behind us lit up again. A new frame appeared, the image slightly blurred but clear enough. Sophie sitting on a familiar leather chair in a room I recognized instantly, the Whitmore Mansion's reading room. Her voice was soft, intimate. You shouldn't worry, my love. He'll never know. Sophie screamed, rushing toward the control table. Marisol, turn it off. You don't understand. Garrett stood frozen, staring at Sophie, then at his mother, his eyes like a man watching his last illusion collapse. No, no way, he stammered, his voice cracking. Sophie, you, with my mother? Lucinda tried to stand upright, her shoulders trembling. She inhaled sharply, then gave a brittle laugh, the kind of laugh that comes when someone knows control is long lost. Yes, I was foolish once. But not in the way you think, Marisol. Don't believe you can destroy this family with a cheap video. I took a step forward, lowering my voice though it carried clearly across the room. Cheap is what you and your son did to others. The truth, that's always expensive. Garrett staggered back, his eyes clouded with disbelief. I could almost see the exact moment when he realized his world was collapsing piece by piece. He turned to his mother, his voice hoarse. Mom, is this true? Lucinda gripped her purse tightly, her eyes darting away. But that brief hesitation was enough for everyone to understand the video wasn't staged. One guest, a longtime associate of the Whitmore family, shook his head and muttered to the person beside him. And to think she's been preaching morality all these years. Lucinda snapped her head toward me, her voice shaking with fury. What do you want? Money? Fame? You think you win by humiliating us? I don't want money. I just want to take back the part of my life you and your son stole from me. Winning or losing, that's not what I'm after. Garrett lunged toward the control table, trying to yank the cables from the screen. Elias caught him in time. The two struggled amid shouts and the hum of still running cameras. Guests rushed for the exits, dresses and suits in disarray. the smell of wine mixing with fear. The scene was chaos like a storm tearing through a glittering ballroom. I watched it all like an outsider. Every feeling in me had already burned past pain. What remained was cold emptiness. Elias pulled me aside, his voice low and urgent. Marisol, let's go. You shouldn't stay here. I turned to him, seeing in his eyes the one thing still pure that night: genuine concern. No, Elias, I said softly. I need to hear them lie one last time. Garrett broke free, hair disheveled, tie crooked. He looked at me, shouting, You destroyed me, Marisol. You destroyed my mother. I answered, each word slicing through the thick air. I didn't destroy anyone, Garrett. I just showed everyone the truth you've been hiding. Lucinda stepped forward, her hand trembling but her voice loud and clear. You have no idea what you're playing with. Some secrets, if exposed, will kill this family. I smiled faintly and asked, What secret? The one where you slept with your son's lover, or another one, the one even Garrett doesn't know yet? That question tore through the air like a blade. Lucinda staggered back, her face draining of color, lips quivering without sound. Garrett looked from her to me, his eyes lost between confusion and fury. What else don't I know? He demanded, his voice dropping like stones onto the floor. Lucinda didn't answer. She turned away, but tears had already spilled down her cheeks. Sophie sobbed in the corner, while I stayed still because sometimes quiet composure is the only way to make others face the truth. Garrett rushed to his mother, gripping her shoulders, his voice trembling. Mom, please. I have to know. Lucinda pushed him away weakly and managed to say, half confession, half warning, Garrett, don't force me. Not everything is what you think. There was no triumph left in me, only pity and regret. Because in that instant, I understood that people destroy themselves not through sin, but through lies told for so long they start believing them. The air in the hall felt thick, as if someone had poured invisible smoke over everyone's heads. Elias stepped forward. He placed a brown envelope on the table, sliding it toward Garrett, his voice deep but steady. This is the original. I've kept it for 10 years. I once thought that if I revealed it, this family would fall apart. But it turns out, it was already rotten. Garrett snatched the envelope, his hands trembling, eyes wild. He tore it open, pulling out a document, his gaze locking on the bold line. Subject A. Garrett Whitmore. DNA does not match Edgar Whitmore. Subject B. Elias Whitmore. Direct biological relation confirmed with Edgar Whitmore. I could hear a pin drop, even my own heartbeat slowing. Garrett swayed, barely able to stand, his mouth twisting, voice breaking. No, no way. Elias, you forged this. You're trying to destroy me and steal the Whitmore name, aren't you? Elias said nothing. He looked straight at their mother, his eyes a storm of anger and sorrow. Lucinda stepped back, the chair behind her crashing to the floor. She raised a hand to her mouth, her voice shaking. Garrett, I didn't want you to find out like this. What, like this? You were going to hide it from me forever? Lucinda blinked, then seemed to collapse into the chair, her small shoulders trembling. Your father, Edgar, betrayed me. He had another woman, a young girl at the company. I lost my mind, tried to hold this family together. And in my weakness, she swallowed hard. Tears falling, I had you. Garrett shook his head again and again, stepping back, laughing bitterly. So that's it. I'm nothing. I'm not his son, not the rightful heir to this house. You hid it from me all these years, living as if everything was perfect. He turned toward me, eyes bloodshot, his voice breaking apart. Are you happy now, Marisol? You wanted to see me ruined, and you've got it. This truth wasn't mine to deliver, it came on its own, like a storm sweeping away every facade people had built. Lucinda covered her face, sobbing. Garrett, you're still my son. No matter what. Garrett pushed her hand away, his words hissing out like steam. Don't call me that. You only care about yourself. You hid this to protect your reputation so people would keep calling you the respectable Mrs. Whitmore. And me? I'm just the product of the filth you tried to bury. Elias stepped forward, placing a hand on his brother's shoulder, his voice quiet but firm. Garrett, I didn't reveal this to humiliate you. I wanted everyone to know the truth so no one has to live in lies anymore. Lies? Garrett let out a hoarse laugh, his voice cracking. You talk like some saint. You're the legitimate son, the one father loved, so it's easy for you to act noble. But what about me, Elias? I've lived my whole life in the shadow of a man who wasn't even my father, and a mother who never truly loved me. Lucinda lifted her tearful eyes. I love you, Garrett. I did everything for you. No, you loved the Whitmore name. Garrett shouted. You loved the money, the prestige, the glamorous parties. I was just your tool to keep that mask in place. Everything that had once made me fear them, the power, the status, the polished image now crumbled before me like chipped paint peeling off to reveal the rotted wall beneath. Lucinda staggered to her feet, looking around, her voice weak. What more do you want? To watch me lose every shred of dignity? Elias quietly reached into his pocket and pulled out an old photograph, a middle-aged man holding a young boy with eyes identical to his own. He placed the photo on the table and spoke slowly. Father wanted to tell you before he died. But he was afraid. Afraid you would hate him forever. Lucinda looked at the picture, trembling, then broke into sobs. Garrett turned away, his fists clenched so tightly that blood welled from his fingertips. His breath came ragged as he spoke. Do any of you have any idea how I feel right now? I've lost my father, my mother, my name. All in one night. Elias stepped closer, his voice calm but clear. You haven't lost anything, Garrett. You've only lost what was never yours. That sentence cut like a cold blade through the space between them. Garrett glared at him, eyes full of fury, but then his shoulders sagged. He gasped for air, let out a dry laugh, and stepped back. Fine, Elias. You win. And mother? He turned toward Lucinda. Did you ever once think about telling me the truth, even once in your life? She bowed her head, tears dripping onto the floor. Garrett looked around the room, his eyes brushing over me not with hatred, but with a hollow, merciless emptiness. Then he turned and walked straight out of the hall, the cameras still recording his retreat. Elias stood still, watching him go, his shoulders trembling slightly, but he didn't follow. I walked closer and gently placed my hand on his arm. Are you okay? No one's okay after a truth like this. But at least, it's been said. I looked toward the doorway where Garrett had disappeared, watching his figure fade down the long red-carpeted hall. The night wind slipped through the gap in the door, carrying the scent of wine and wilted roses. Lucinda and both her sons had lost the roles they'd played for years. And I, once the outsider, was the only one still standing amid the ruins, both witness and catalyst for the truth that had come to light. But even in that moment, as I saw Elias bend down to pick up the fallen DNA paper, I knew this story wasn't over. Because truth, once unearthed, never ends in a single night. It spreads like a crack across glass, slow but irreversible. The morning light filtered through the white curtains, soft and cold. I opened my eyes to an unfamiliar ceiling, and the faint breeze from the window still carrying the scent of last night's rain. Elias's apartment was on the second floor of the old wooden house he rented as a photo studio, the place he once called temporary. Now it had become my refuge after the night everything collapsed. His shirt lay draped over a chair, still smelling faintly of coffee and photochemicals. I sat up, pulling the blanket around my shoulders. Outside, Eugene was waking, distant cars, birdsong, and the cool breath of an October morning. Everything seemed normal, too normal, as if I had just woken from a nightmare. Elias entered, holding 2 cups of hot coffee, his voice low and tired. You're awake. I nodded, taking the cup. The rising steam stung my eyes. When did you get back? Around 4 a.m. I had to get the police out of the hotel. They asked a lot of questions, but I told them it was all a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? I let out a faint laugh. No, Elias. It was the truth. And the truth is never called a misunderstanding. He sat across from me. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion, his hair disheveled, but his voice was gentle as wind. You won, Marisol. But I'm not sure you're the same person I once loved. Maybe you're right, I said quietly. I traded the best part of myself just to see them fall. And when they did, I didn't feel any lighter. He stood, set his cup down, and looked out the window. We both lost something last night, Marisol. You lost your faith, and I lost the woman I thought could be saved from her darkness. Then he left without his coat, without a goodbye. The door closed softly, leaving only the ticking clock and the faint hum of the city beyond. I listening to the ticking clock, the draft seeping in through the open window. No more noise, just me and my tangled thoughts, like loose threads from a torn wedding gown. I opened the closet and saw the wedding dress hanging quietly in the corner. The hem was stained with red wine, a few beads missing, the lace wrinkled. I touched the cold fabric, remembering the night I stood under those glittering lights, my heart burning with fury. Now, thinking back, I wasn't sure what I had wanted more, justice, or the satisfaction of watching others fall. The phone rang. The screen showed an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then answered. Marisol Dean? Yes. This is Agent Shull with the Eugene Police Department. We need to confirm a few details regarding last night's incident. Can you come in this morning? I shivered slightly but kept my voice steady. I'll be there. Give me an hour. Years ago, I had sat in an interrogation room as a victim of financial harassment. Back then, I had been trembling, fragile. Today, I would sit in that chair again, but no longer as the helpless one. I gathered my things, put on a gray sweater, tied my hair back. As I went downstairs, I noticed the morning paper left at the door. The front page showed a grainy, enlarged photo of me standing in the ballroom, microphone in hand, face cold, the screen behind me displaying the scandalous footage. The headline read, "Whitmore Wedding Turns to Chaos, Family Secrets Exposed Before Cameras." I folded the paper, the wind catching it and sending it fluttering down the steps. Everything I had once tried to hide was now fodder for the world. Yet strangely, I wasn't afraid. Maybe because, after all, I had nothing left to lose. At the station, the small room smelled of old coffee. Agent Shull, wearing glasses, sat across from me with a thick folder. He didn't look up right away, speaking in an even tone. "Miss Marisol, can you explain the purpose of showing that video during the wedding?" It wasn't about showing off. It was revealing what they tried to hide. You understand the consequences of that action, don't you? I do. But if you had been humiliated in front of hundreds of people, you'd understand why I chose not to stay silent. Shull nodded slightly, his eyes carrying a trace of empathy. He flipped through several pages, then said, "The Whitmore family is now under investigation for financial misconduct. Some transfer documents bear your signature. We need confirmation that these transactions were voluntary." I understood immediately. Garrett had begun to strike back. Unable to accept defeat, he was trying to paint me as a fraud. I took a USB drive from my bag and placed it on the table. All the contracts were signed at the law office, with witnesses and notaries present. This drive contains the full backup of every confirmation. Email. Thank you. You realize you're at the center of something quite large. I've always been at the center, I said softly with a faint smile. The only difference is this time I'm not afraid. The interview ended, and I stepped outside into the bright sunlight. On the way home, I stopped at a small cafe, the one where Elias and I used to sit in late afternoons. I ordered a cappuccino and took the old seat by the window. A young waitress glanced at me, hesitating before asking, "You're the woman from the newspaper, aren't you? You're really brave." Brave? No. I did what anyone would do when they have nothing left to lose. I suddenly remembered Elias's words, the ones I had tried to forget that morning. "You won, but you're not the woman I loved anymore." Now, I realized he was right. Because the woman sitting here no longer believed in love, no longer feared loneliness. She only knew how to survive among the ruins, like a statue that could never break again. Perhaps that was the real price of victory, standing still while everything else moved on, realizing you no longer belonged anywhere. That afternoon, I was sorting through stacks of files in my temporary office, a small rented space in an old shopping complex that used to be a widow's sewing shop I once knew. No one spoke about the Whitmore wedding anymore, but the tabloids still whispered about the vengeful bride. I didn't respond, didn't correct anything, letting it all settle like silt after the rain. When the clock neared 6 p.m., there was a light knock, 3 even taps. I looked up, thinking it was Elias returning, but when the door opened, the sight made my heart stop. Garrett. He looked thinner, his suit wrinkled, his tie crooked, eyes hollow and red from sleepless nights. The tall, confident man I once knew was now only a shadow of exhaustion. "Marisol," he said, his voice hoarse, gravelly. I didn't know who else to come to. The man who had once mocked me before a crowd now trembled like a lost child. What do you need from me, Garrett? He reached into his coat pocket and placed a small black hard drive on the desk between us. I didn't come for forgiveness. I just wanted to say one last thing. And give you this. I found it in my mother's safe, he said, his voice breaking. It's a copy of the old surveillance system from the mansion, the part she hid, the one no one knew existed. He paused, then spoke softly, like confessing a sin. You think I'm a liar? And yes, I was. But the person who built every lie around me was my mother. I held the hard drive but didn't turn on the laptop yet. Inside me was a mix of curiosity and fear. I asked slowly, you want me to watch this? Yes. But before you open it, I need to say, it's not as simple as you think. He sat down, his fingers interlaced, the knuckles pale. 2 years before my father died, my mother hired someone to follow him. She suspected he was planning to transfer a large part of the estate to Elias. Back then, she didn't yet know Elias was his biological son. When she realized she was about to lose control, she did something terrible. My throat went dry. What are you talking about? Garrett looked at me, his eyes clouded. She and a man named Patrick Lowell, a former company manager, met with my father at his office. In the video, they threatened him, forcing him to sign the transfer of control. A week later, he had a stroke. I didn't know. I really didn't. Mother said he died of heart failure, and I believed her. I defended her for years against everyone, even you. But when I saw the video, I realized she was the one who killed him. The room suddenly felt cold. I could hear the fan turning slowly, the clock ticking. Garrett covered his face, his voice trembling. I've lived my whole life inside a lie, Marisol. You can hate me, I deserve it. But now I don't even know who I am anymore. The son of an affair, or an accomplice to a murderer. What are you going to do with the video? Turn it in. I've already given a copy to the police. They're investigating. I thought, you should know first, because you were always the only one who saw through her. And also because, he paused, taking a deep breath. You were once the only person who made me want to be better. I smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. You want redemption, Garrett? Or you just want to share the guilt? He shook his head, his eyes strangely sad. No. I want you to understand. You didn't win, Marisol. No one did. You destroyed me, but you also helped me see who I really am. And that truth isn't as pretty as I thought. He stood, his fingers trembling as he placed the hard drive back into my hand. I'm leaving Eugene. Maybe Portland, maybe farther. I can't stay here another day. What about your mother? Garrett was silent for a moment, then said softly, almost to himself. She's in the hospital. After the police came, she had a breakdown. They said it's a nervous collapse. But I know what's killing her isn't illness, it's the truth. He turned toward the door. When his hand touched the handle, he stopped for a second but didn't look back. You can hate me forever, but don't let yourself become another version of my mother. Sometimes revenge is just another form of self-punishment. I looked at the hard drive in my hand, filled with emotions I couldn't name. I plugged it in, and the screen lit up. The video opened, the image was grainy, the timestamp reading, Eugene Estate Office, 9:14 a.m. Lucinda walked in, straight posture, white coat, lips red as blood. Edgar sat across from her, tense, his hands gripping a folder. Patrick Lowell stood nearby, laying a paper on the table, his voice smooth. If you don't sign, everyone will know about your asset transfers. The press will destroy the Whitmore reputation. Edgar slammed his hand on the desk, shouting, Are you threatening me, Lucinda? No, Edgar. I'm protecting your name. Sign it, and you can rest. Then the video cut off. Part of me wanted to throw up. Another part just burned with bitterness. Everything from beginning to end was a tangled web of deceit and fear. I closed the laptop and leaned back, letting the orange light wash over my face. Sometimes, truth doesn't set anyone free. It just strips us bare until there's nowhere left to hide. That night, Eugene was wrapped in fog, thick like gray silk draping the city. I was in my small apartment, writing a brief report to the police about the video Garrett had given me. When the phone rang, the caller ID showed the name of the reporter who had once covered the Whitmore wedding. Marisol, you haven't heard yet. The Whitmore mansion, it's on fire. The whole neighborhood saw it. Police and firefighters are there. Someone said Lucinda's trapped inside. I gripped the phone, frozen between shock and a quiet wave of sorrow. I had never liked Lucinda, but the thought of her, a woman who once ruled her own empire now consumed by flames, made it impossible to feel indifferent. I grabbed my coat and drove. The road to the estate was blocked, smoke carried for half a mile. When I arrived, a crowd had gathered, the wind whipping through the trees, faces lit red by the blaze. The Whitmore mansion was now only a charred skeleton, the roof collapsed, pillars glowing with heat. A police officer recognized me and approached. Miss Dean? You shouldn't be here. I know. But tell me, was anyone inside? He hesitated, then glanced toward the cordoned area. We found a female body. Not yet confirmed, but likely Mrs. Lucinda Whitmore. And a man. Witnesses say they saw him leaving just before the fire started. What name? I asked, my heartbeat pounding. He checked his notebook. Garrett. Garrett Whitmore. The world seemed to stop for a few seconds. I could hear the wind through my hair, the faint crackle of burning metal. Garrett had walked away before the flames consumed everything. I just stood there, watching the fire die down, feeling as though I was witnessing the end of a dynasty. The walls that once held their portraits were now only soot and ash. By morning, the news flooded every channel. Headlines called it the most tragic fire in Eugene's elite history. What kept me awake was Inspector Scholl's call that afternoon. Miss Dean, we examined the site. A safe was found in the basement, burned on the outside, but inside we recovered a letter. It's from Mrs. Lucinda Whitmore. His voice dropped as he read a few lines. I hired Patrick Lowell to shut Edgar up for good. I never meant to kill him, only to scare him. But he fell, and he never woke up. Garrett knew nothing. I destroyed everything to protect our name, and now that name is what's burning me alive. It seems she knew she'd be exposed. And the person who brought us the evidence, he paused, inhaling, was Garrett. He came in himself. Yes. 3 days before the fire, he gave us a copy of the hard drive you had turned in. He said he wanted to end all the lies. But after the fire, we couldn't find him. That evening I went to the site once it was mostly cleared. The back wall where the family portrait once hung had a scorched corner left. On the ground lay a warped photo frame, half burned, showing the remains of the picture. Lucinda smiling, her hand on Garrett's shoulder, and Elias standing a little apart, his eyes unfocused. I bent down to pick it up. A shard of glass cut my finger, leaving a thin line of blood. Strangely, the pain brought clarity. Some wounds, no matter how small, remind you you're still alive. In the distance, a firefighter was boxing up evidence. He looked at me and said quietly, "The fire started in the basement, near the safe. No sign of electrical fault. It was lit from inside." I had to ask myself. Lucinda was too clever to wait for someone else to end her story. That night, back in my apartment, the smell of smoke still clung to my hair, my coat. I placed the warped frame on the table beside a cup of cold tea. I opened the laptop again, replaying the old video. This time, I paused at the final frame, Lucinda leaning over the desk, her expression strange, not entirely cruel, but like someone about to do something beyond redemption. A new email appeared on my screen. The sender's address was gibberish, with an attachment titled "Don't Look Back." Inside was a short, shaky phone video. Garrett stood at a bus station, wearing a gray coat, hair messy, looking straight into the camera. "If you're seeing this, it means I'm alive. I told them everything and I'm leaving. Not to hide, just to start over. Somewhere no one knows my name. Thank you for waking me up, Marisol." Even if it was in the cruelest way. The video cut off abruptly, leaving only the sound of distant wind and waves. I stared at the dark screen, unsure whether to feel relief or grief. Maybe that was what Garrett wanted, the truth to be spoken, and for each of us to carry our own darkness forward. Outside, the rain had stopped. Moonlight shone through the window, falling over the burned photograph. I brushed my fingers over the small part of Elias's face that remained, whispering to myself. In the end, maybe none of us ever truly escapes the past. We just learn how to live with it. A year later, Eugene had changed. The trees once scorched near the Whitmore estate now grew green again, as if no fire had ever touched them. I had changed, too. Everything in me had softened, because I had learned how to live with the cracks. That afternoon, I sat in a small cafe on Olive Avenue, the same place I had sat alone a year earlier, staring out at the street, not knowing where to go. The smell of roasted coffee mixed with the scent of baked bread, soft jazz playing in the background. Outside, the wind brushed through the trees, scattering a few late leaves. I wasn't waiting for anyone, yet I felt an odd calm, as if expecting something I already knew would come. When the door opened, the wind chime tinkled. Elias walked in. Still tall, still quiet-eyed, but something in his face had changed, steadier, gentler. He looked around, found me, and smiled faintly. He sat across from me, tilting his head slightly, his gaze both distant and near. "You still choose this cafe?" he asked, his voice low and warm. "Why not? The coffee's still as bitter as ever, but at least I know what I'm drinking," I replied, half joking, half serious. He chuckled softly, then fell silent for a while, staring at the steaming cup in front of him. Maybe we were both thinking about the year that had passed, the sleepless nights, the headlines about the investigation, the names erased from the company board, the properties once owned by the Whitmore family now under government control. "How long have you been away from Eugene?" I asked. "Not even 8 months. I stayed in Bend for a while, worked for a small documentary studio. It was good. Nobody there knew about me, and no one mentioned the Whitmore name anymore. Garrett was still missing, the fire case was closed, and no one knew whether he was alive or dead. Every question stopped at that hazy border where each of us had to face the emptiness in our own way." Elias took a sip of coffee, set the cup down, and his voice softened. "I've thought a lot about it, about everything about you. There were times I was angry at you for not stopping. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized. Maybe you did what I never had the courage to do." I smiled faintly. "I'm not sure that was courage. When someone's pushed to the edge, they stop being afraid of losing anything more." "Maybe," he said, nodding slowly, resting his hand on the table near mine. "But maybe real victory isn't about making someone pay. It's having the courage to forgive." I went silent for a few seconds. Forgiveness, that word had been foreign to me for so long. I used to think it meant weakness, letting the ones who hurt me walk free. But now, after everything had burned down, I understood. Forgiveness isn't about releasing them. It's about freeing yourself from the old fire. Maybe you're right. But sometimes to forgive, you have to let everything fall apart first. Elias smiled softly. No arguments, no explanations, just quiet agreement. He understood me better than anyone else, that I wasn't talking about hatred, but about the cost of truth. A moment later, he opened his leather bag and took out a stack of photographs. All black and white, Eugene from different angles. The misty Willamette River, the old wooden houses, the farmer's market at dawn, and finally a shot of a scorched wall left after the fire. On the wall, someone had written in white paint, "Forgive, not forget." I touched the photo gently. "You took this?" "Yes. The first time I came back to Eugene. I thought if you saw it, maybe you'd understand not everything broken is meaningless." That wall, strangely, didn't remind me of pain, but of life, how people still choose to plant flowers on ruins, still sit together in old cafes, still speak of the future, even when the past still smolders. "Do you ever regret it, Elias?" He looked up, his eyes warm but sad. "Yes. But not because I loved you, or because I stayed. I regret how long I lived pretending everything would just disappear. You were different, you faced it, even if it meant destroying everything. Maybe because I was afraid, so afraid I had to tear it all down until there was nothing left to lose." Outside the window, the sunlight softened, streaming through the glass, glinting off the dark surface of the coffee. Elias stood first, leaving money on the table. "I'll stay in Eugene a few more days. If you'd like, we could talk again." I looked up, meeting his eyes in a rare, peaceful silence. "Maybe," I said softly. "Some conversations aren't meant to heal, just to close." He smiled, then walked out. The sunlight on the porch fell over his shoulders, tracing a faint golden line. I watched him go, realizing that sometimes, leaving quietly is the truest beginning. When the door closed, I turned back to my cup. The coffee had gone cold, but the scent lingered. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small envelope, the last letter Garrett had sent me through the police when they closed the fire case. Marisol, if one day you find peace, don't let anyone take it from you. I've paid my part. You've paid yours. Maybe that's enough. I folded the letter and placed it beside the photo of the white wall. Outside, voices filled the street, wheels rolling over the cobblestones. Life went on simple, ordinary, as if no one had ever burned to be reborn. I took a deep breath, letting the aroma of coffee fill the air, and felt my heart lighten. Maybe Elias was right. Real victory isn't about making someone pay, but about sitting still amid the ruins and realizing you still have the courage to begin again, quietly but truly. Sometimes, when I think back, I realize maybe we've all walked through our own ruins, where pain and forgiveness coexist, where every ending is just another beginning. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. If you saw a part of yourself in what I told, please like, follow, and subscribe to join me for more journeys ahead. And what taught you how to forgive, even when the wounds in your heart haven't fully healed?